Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Incomplete Skeptic. Today's guest is John McAndrew. Here's a little flyer we've got with his upcoming data on it. He is doing a concert here in Minnesota, which is where I rail from, for those of you who are unfamiliar with my home state. And North Star Retreats is going to be putting it on, and I tell you what, I've heard his music so many times through the years, and if you are able to make it, it will open your heart and you will have a marvelous experience. Be there or be square. I will be putting the information in the information description part of the YouTube video, so you'll be able to access everything about John and the upcoming gig. So he and I have a very special friend, Mary Jo Robinson. I just thought I'd pop a picture in here to say hi, Mary Jo, from the spirit world, because hopefully she's looking down and saying, oh, good, Timothy and John are together doing something on Zoom. Yeah, they probably don't have Zoom up there, but who knows how it works. And one of the things that I really admire about John is he actually goes into the prisons and the like. And I don't know if he'll be willing to talk about that, but he's carrying the message of the love of Christ. And, it's people like John that, being an ex-con, he inspires me to not go back. So I'm not going back to daycare. That's what I call prison. So I appreciate what he does there. And but about his music, when I listen to his music, I feel loving and lovable. And, it'll make you walk away feeling like you want to be the reason someone feels loved. And it's a powerful feeling to have. And so without further ado, I'm going to close these puppies here so we can show my guest and friend, John McAndrew. John, welcome to the Incomplete Skeptic.
Well, thank you, Tim. We should just quit while we're ahead. That was beautiful. Mary Jo, I miss you and love you. And you remind me of the prison work, which started a long time ago, and we've continued when I came down here to Nashville. And I just thought of another person that we knew, Ernie Larson, who was one
Oh,
of the
yes.
he used to go to prisons and kind of do that on another capacity. But Ernie, I got him to come down to Nashville after I'd moved here, and we started doing pre-release programs for the guys at Riverbend and other places. And then Ernie took off, and somehow or another, I ended up having a job doing that. So, it's really an honor to hook back up with you. We've known each other for, decades, and we know each other's story, we know each other's path, and there's a gentleness about you and your honesty and your path that really affected me when I got this old life and I got this new life, and boy, they're different. The
Mhm.
tough part is I got to get different, you know, I, you know, and make changes. But anyway, thanks for having me, and I'm looking forward to coming up doing the concert. The Recovery Church in St. Paul has been gracious enough to host it, and looking forward to seeing you. Maybe we can get a cup of coffee together too.
That would be wonderful. Yeah. Ernie, I remember when he said, a ton of head ain't worth an ounce of heart.
Yeah,
And so many other things. And his last hurrah at a particular institution we were both very familiar with, he showed up and
yeah,
gave a presentation, and you could see it was pretty much time. And he
yeah,
knew. He knew
yeah.
and he's ready to go meet his maker, man, and I'm sure that he got a big hug when he got up there and said, well done, my faithful servant. Well
Yeah, he
done.
was probably grunting and snorting, how he did it. Those of you that don't know, Mary Jo and Ernie and Pastor Joe and Oh, guys like you and I who, I guess it's fair to say we're old, we're older. When
Hmm.
you look in your life in the rearview mirror and you start to see all these, we call them angels. People have different names for them, but I go, holy cow, how did I run into that person? And why did I run into this person? And Ernie was one of those people who really got on Oprah's show many, many years ago. He wrote a book called Stage Two Recovery, and it sort of talked about a lot of ancient stuff. Nothing's really new about, once we get off, part of my story is I drank really a lot and then I took a lot of drugs that would enable me to drink even more. And I compacted a pretty bad life into those years, and then I got, sobered up and started this new life. Ernie kind of took a lot of those things and really kind of blew them up into an understandable language for everyone, for the people that work with people. I claim that I have issues with mental health and substance abuse. That's my umbrella. It covers it all. Ernie brought it into a language that was fascinating. He gets on Oprah Winfrey, and he brings with him Melody Beattie and other people who kind of followed in Ernie's path. And Marianne Williamson was a part of that, came in that wave. And those people and those things really helped and influenced you and I. So when I do concerts and a lot of the music, I talk about Ernie and Pastor Joe, who started that recovery church. And I've talked about you, to be perfectly honest. I didn't get permission to just use your first name. And I've just been really blessed with running into people. And how can I not be grateful for that? It's just really cool.
There was a fellow who I heard give a presentation at a Sunlight of the Spirit, and he talked about how his daughter was murdered and how he had to grapple with something that he believed in for the entirety, um, probably of 40 years, or so being around here. And among us who believe in forgiveness too. And he said he was really struggling with that, but he was dealing with it. And afterwards, I talked to him and I told him Mary Jo's story and how she hooked me up to start speaking for Mothers Against Drunk Driving and but how she loved and forgave the person who killed Mark, her son, right? And he was floored by that story. And I was on a YouTube video, I don't know, a few years later, and I heard him actually talk about our conversation. He didn't mention any names, which is fine, and I think, carte blanche. We just tell each other stories as the spirit makes it appropriate at the moment. So, you don't need my permission. We're here serving a higher power. So, and, and sometimes the higher power is just kind of in there with that still small voice that somebody recently mentioned to me. His name was John McAndrew.
Uh-huh. You know, it's an interesting thing, this path and the recovery path, and people belong to lots of fellowships and all that stuff. And there's a secret sauce to all this thing and how it all got started. And it was two people talking to each other who had tried to change their lives, and they went to every church, and I'm sure, I know one or two of them got dunked and all went through all this stuff with psychologists and ministers. And I know there are probably people listening that have tried to change their lives with rabbis and doctors and medicine, all these different things. For some wild reason, these two men shared their story, and they found out that they actually understood what they went through. So I work in the field and I work a lot with, substance abuse, mental health and stuff. And Ernie Larson used to say this. He'd point to everybody, and, our crowd. We're sitting out there and we're a little busted up kind of a gang of people. And he would say, "You're the expert," and I understand that really keenly now, that we've been through this stuff and we're the experts. That's why you and Mary Jo, that's why she found you, you know.
Hmm.
And I think that this process, now I was raised Catholic, and this could ruffle a feather or two, but I just thought the only way to this, whatever, and I came into my new life with like a third grade God, who, to be totally honest, I'm sitting in church and they got statues and they all start looking like Jerry Garcia to me, you know, without the wire rims, but this powerful God, and the way it was described to me, or possibly the way that I interpreted it, was this is one angry, counting, keeping score dude. And so I was kind of fearful. When I entered this new life, that's what I started with. And I've been given the opportunity to maybe go, well, and be really honest, Tim, I was pretty pissed off at this whole thing about
Hmm.
this God, because God never did anything I asked. But somebody convinced me that to do this work that you're going to have to do now, you're going to just have to reach your hand out and kind of just reintroduce yourself. And this God, whatever you think it's going to be, might just reach back. And let's see if we can get acquainted and slowly kind of find each other and see what you think about it. Very gentle approach. And what happens is we run into Mary Jo's and we run into Ernie's because we're doing the work and we're in this little path. And all of a sudden we run into people and we start to be, I think we get forgiveness, we get understanding, love, comfort, and understanding, St. Francis prayer. And then we feel this, wow, ooh, that still
Hmm.
small voice, just for me. It wasn't Jerry Garcia. It was a loving kind of a friend. And I'm still searching and figuring it out. But I got to stay in contact with that, and do this work. And and being on this program with you brings back a lot of that stuff. How many times were we in the room together where it was Mary Jo or Ernie or Pastor Joe and all these different characters that we run into on our path and on our journey. So yeah, you start to find this, you get reacquainted with a whole new concept of what faith might be, or your higher power and stuff. And what a cool thing, because when I was Catholic it was Father what's his name, and bless his heart he's doing the best he can. But I thought the only way I find this God thing, I evidently, is he's got the key to some little vault back there, and the only way I can get it is through. And now the key is through people like Mary Jo and you and Ernie and everybody else on this path, and they can be on the path for 10 minutes. You know how that is, 10 minutes or
Hmm.
40 years, and something happens when we do this together.
I think when you play a song, sometimes you can pack in 40 years of gratitude into a few minutes, you know, and love is both a verb and a noun, but uh, I can't imagine a life without music, even though I don't play. And it's elevated me in times where I thought life was pretty much I just don't want to be here. But it was one of the few things that I could still feel like there's a part of the reason for staying, you know. And I would get messages that I felt like God was trying to talk to me through music and through your music. And I think we remind each other in a way that short circuits all the logical arguments sometimes through music. And I want to share one little thing, and it's about the guy who said he made some progress with that forgiveness for the person that murdered his daughter because of God putting me into his field for a couple of minutes, and telling that story about Mary Jo. And but he said something you reminded me of when you're talking about your connection with the Catholic Church and stuff. And he was a Catholic as a young person, and he said after he, came into a bunch of people's presence that were talking this G word, this God stuff. And he said he thought, what? No, no, that's okay. No, thanks. Because he said this little thing. He says he walked into a church after meeting some of these people, and he saw this guy hanging up on a cross, and he thought, well, if this is what God does to his only son that he loves, wait till he gets a hold of me, you know.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we don't know. It's like when I was in prison, I actually died in prison, and my spirit left and then came back into my body. And afterwards, I realized that we have a choice about being here or not. And um, and I thanked God that there is no prison wall so thick that he can't get through it, you know. And it violates all the rules. And you know what? He didn't even have to get on my visiting list, you know. He bypassed all the rules, and I'm very grateful for that. So, but music bypasses the rules too to some extent. And what are some of the powerful reports you've gotten back from people? Maybe I know the list is long but do you have any outstanding memories that you'd like to
Well,
share?
here's a few things, and I'll kind of update you. I've started working, I've been working at treatment centers and going and doing music and stories and all that stuff. But Cumberland Heights here in Nashville, I've been going out there for well over 20 years, and they hired me a few years back to start a music professionals program, and then I started to do music groups and music assisted therapy. I call it music and spirituality because I think it's the same thing. And they've given me the opportunity to have a music room and be consistently doing groups and individuals. And the experiences are really overwhelming. And then I started to kind of train others and how to use music in a recovery setting and how to incorporate these different things, forgiveness, perception, using music. And I'll tell you two incidences, and then I'll kind of come back to what I do now. When I remember being about 9 years old, and I hate to kind of harp on some of the stuff that happened as a kid, but I grew up with an alcoholic father, and he got violent, and he had been in World War II in Iwo Jima, and I understand more now, what vets go through and different things. But regardless, there was violence in the home and it was scary sometimes. And my older brothers were musicians, as my father was. My brother put an album on one day, and I was just laying in my bed, and it was the Chambers Brothers. And this song came on. It was People Get Ready, there's a train coming. I wasn't thinking about what did that mean and where that feeling just, it rushed over me like a tsunami, and I teared up, and I played it over and over and over, and it was the first time I didn't realize, but I experienced the power of music to get me into the present moment. Because ideally, a lot of this recovery stuff is basically about, I could ask you, where are you living? Are you worried about what you did in the past? Are you worried about what's happening tomorrow? Or are you right here in the present moment? And most of us, it's a mix of it all. But that power of music brings me right into the present moment, which is sometimes scary. You know, Fast forward all these years, I become a musician and I start to write. And in my old life, when I look back in the mirror and I see all these angels and I understand, about the only time I didn't feel, Tim, like just peeling my skin off was when I could sit at a piano or play a guitar. And I didn't know that's why I was so driven to it. I left high school and went to college for a while and kind of wandered around the country as this little lost boy. And sometimes I'd find a piano, and it was a place where I could go and I could even sleep overnight underneath that piano. And
Mm.
those are other stories. And now I find myself several years later, I left Minnesota, I got a record deal, I started my new journey in my life, and I get a record deal and I go down to Muscle Shoals, Alabama, and I'm doing this record at this famous place, and it came out okay. And they asked me back the next year to come play at the WC Handy Festival. And I go, oh, I'd be honored. Here again, Timmy, I have no idea what really God's lesson plan is. I think it's all about. So I go down there and they go, hey, while you're here, could you go play at the old folks home? That's what
Nice.
we call them, I know. So I go, oh, I'd love to. And I had a sax player, and since then I've done it hundreds of times. But we're getting ready to wail away, and it's a beat up piano, kind of like the one they had at the CRC in St. Paul, busted keys. They're wheeling everybody in. It's a usual senior center, 80% women. The other nutty men are still running around. And right before I start, they wheeled in a woman in a wheelchair off to my left. And the nurse came up, said, this is Ruth, and she's been catatonic for 2.5 years. And she was sitting there, and I looked over, and it just didn't look like she was there at all. Very gray, sullen, just kind of staring off. I said, well, that's sad. So we start playing. Third song, I play All of Me. It's an old jazz tune, and it's great sax players, and I'm banging away. And I looked in the back of the room, and I could see the head nurse kind of going, oh no, oh no. And then another nurse walks up to her and goes, leave her alone. I could read her lips. And then I noticed everybody's heads had turned. Ruth got out of her wheelchair. She starts approaching the middle of the room, and she is dancing. And she looks like she's 20 years old in the face. She's lit up and she's dancing. And she was a pretty big lady, and boy, everything is shaking and rolling. And in the place, people are in tears. And I go, what in the heck? I'm going to just keep playing. I don't want to ruin a good time. And finally, we had to stop. There were two people next to her. And within 3 seconds, she went back to this gray person and had to hold her and get her back to the chair. That lit a fire, and I wanted to find out why. And now we know, because of MRIs and brain imaging and studying of science, that the human brain is affected by dementia. Every part of the brain except this little part that remembers music. And it'll remember exactly when you heard it, what environment you were in. And now we see it on TV a lot, these miracles that happen. Some old guy hadn't said a word in 10 years at the senior center, walks in and plays a very complicated piece on the piano, note for note. It's fascinating. And in terms of people that are in recovery and in mental health stuff, what a valuable tool to access those emotions. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're a little scary, but we need to do that in order to heal. I think everyone knows that. And I'll tell you, I do it every day, every week. I'll hear a man who was a combat vet who has just locked himself in his fear, and we'll do a little group, and I'll say, play a song you can remember and when you heard it and how it affected you. And they'll play some song they listened to while they were in combat that just kept them from giving up. And they'll just break down and the tears come and all that stuff. And so you asked me about music, man. You're talking about my thing, the power of it and the use of it is so common that I don't think we're even aware that everywhere we go, there's some sort of music playing to affect your mood.
The
Long answer.
Oh no, it's not. It's a perfect answer, and I didn't see it that way. I'm trying to figure out how I can share this thing and see you at the same time. I keep coming back to that little problem, but Hang tight just a second. You can't see the screen, right?
No, I can't.
Okay, all right. I think I might have saw something here. So, I liked your scientific explanation about the brain and the like. Um, and I'm going to just put it into the category of glimmers versus triggers. And I'm going to show you the slide if I can find a way to share it.
Okay.
And can you see it?
I cannot.
Okay. I have to share it the other way then. Um, uno momento, por favor. Okay, should be able to see
There we
it
go.
here. Okay, and I'm not going to
Yeah,
maximize the screen because that way then I
beautiful.
can't do things at the same time. But you know, the concept of glimmers and triggers.
Oh,
You just
beautiful.
read this and tell me what you think of it.
Have you heard about glimmers? They are the opposite of triggers. A glimmer is a tiny micro moment of happiness, a sign of hope. Once you begin to look for them, they will start to appear everywhere. That's really powerful. Um, a glimmer. Wow. And I think of that as a spiritual experience. I guess that's my first reaction to it. And we talk in the world of science and spirituality, they're both really coming back together because we're finding out how, how do we make ourselves physically, mentally, and spiritually more available for these little glimmers, and what's going on in the noggin, in the brain. And what fascinates me about the science, and I believe this is on the same track, is I know a doctor, a very renowned doctor, who's tested, among other things, antidepressants and antipsychotics for private companies, for the government, for everybody. And he said, John, I think 80 some percent of the drugs we test, the placebo works just as well. And he goes, and I think it's even more because we don't know. Is it possible that if we're put in the right spot spiritually to get these little glimmers, that these are
Hmm.
kind of the things that we should try to bottle?
There was
You
a
should take two a day. And I think a lot of people in their faith journeys and their travels and in the way they live, this is what they do. They're kind of glimmer givers,
Mhm.
for other people. Yeah. That's great. I
Cool,
like
thank you.
that.
There was a fellow named Joe Dispenza that wrote a book, um, the about the science of the brain and the like, and he had multiple breaks in his spine, and they said that he's not going to walk again, need Harrington surgery and the like, and he turned down the surgery, and he said, you know, the power that made the body can heal the body, and and he just kept seeing himself as being healed, and what we focus on gets our power. And he said one day after doing that for hours a day, he just knew that he knew that he knew that he was going to be fine, and his spine was going to be fine. And within 9 months, he was back doing yoga instruction, martial arts again. And he just did the impossible. And he said, if I ever get healed of this, I want to write a book about it. In chapter 2 of his book, he said that he studied things like you were talking about, prayer and healing. I'm not putting words in your mouth, but that's kind of what I heard you say.
Yeah.
And he studied the idea of spontaneous remission of incurable diseases. And I think you do that with your music, is people have said about people like me that I should have been put in the electric chair for, driving impaired and killing a child, and lock them up and throw away the key and stuff. Or you'll never heal, just make your will and get ready to move on. And to me, it's a very similar concept. Um, but we come back from, it's like God's favorite word is impossible. And I can't remember who said that, but you know, these concepts and the energy and the spirit of these loving thoughts are exactly what your music encapsulates, in my opinion. And I want to show you one more thing, get your opinion, then I'll put the whole thing back in your lap here again. Uno
All
momento.
right.
All right. Here we go. I saw this the first day that I changed my ways and I started hanging out with what some people call winners, stick with the winners, you know.
Yeah.
This was up on the wall and it reminded me of my grandmother who never saw me sober. She died before I sobered up.
Uh-huh.
And she had my photograph on top of her, my baby picture on top of her TV. And when I came in and saw this, it reminded me of her. And, you know, the last time she saw me was in uh, a prison jumpsuit with manacles on my ankles and handcuffs on my wrists attached to a box and big burly guards standing over my shoulder. And I, you know, the warden allowed me to have a deathbed visit. And it's either that or go to the cemetery as they were putting her in the ground. And I thought, well, you know, I want to see her while she's still alive. But she took one look at me and was very disappointed. And I felt that, you know, but now maybe she's looking down. Maybe she's hanging out with Mary Jo or something. I don't know. Wow, yeah, cool, man. You know, she might be one of the angels now. So what do you think, feel in your heart when you see this?
When I look at it, well, your story is very powerful, you know, and that, but when I looked at that, I see that little child in me who came into this world as a human being, you know, and the human condition is that I enter and I have some basic needs and instincts. They're in me. I seek approval, you know, and you see that in children. They look to see if they're doing the right thing and they want to be patted on the head. When that happens, they do that thing over and over. Some affection. You want to be loved and comforted. Animals do that, you know. You want to feel safe. You want to feel you have some sort of control and power over your life and your surroundings. And I see that little child with those instincts. Someone like me, though, I grew up and I started to, with these instincts, they got misguided and I wanted more than everybody else did. They blindly were driving me, you know, and when I'm drinking and doping, you know, I could still hear that little voice somewhere over there going, you know, dude, that's really a bad thing to do. You don't want to do that.
Hmm.
But I had no power to stop. And so those instincts are still driving me. And, you know, part of what Ernie Larson, we spoke of earlier in the program, he talked about in stage 2 recovery, who's driving your bus? Well, it's simple. It's still that little kid that's in that picture who's afraid of something. And we laugh about it as adults that some of us that start this journey and, you know, we go hang around with others. We talk about this, you know, I got to grow up. I got to grow up. But boy, those basic human instincts, it's the human condition. And several Jesuits and spiritual leaders have been speaking about it for a really long time. And so to say that I'm bad or junk, you know, I I guess I'm not going with that anymore. I mean, I like what that says because I'm not
Hmm.
junk. I am a human being. It's the human condition to want these things, and if we're not getting them, we get very fearful. Myself, as you know, uh, who I am, nothing's ever enough. You know, and so I'm always going to want more, and nothing's ever going to satisfy me. It's addiction, it's alcoholism, it's all that stuff. And I'm constantly going to be fearful, you know. If I can get in the moment and realize everything's okay, I guess that's what I see in that picture. The good of me, the bad of me, this is what you get. And the song on my album, Better Side of Me, which is the title song, that's what that whole thing is about. I got my darkness, I got my light, I got all this stuff. Sometimes I'm afraid, sometimes I'm okay. I just hope you see the better side of me today. That's kind of the whole. And what is our job, Timmy? Is to go, whoever we run into, tell them you're okay and you're not junk.
Mhm.
Guess
Amen.
what? You're a human being. Some of us are worse. What do they say? Sicker than others. You know, we
Right.
just, man, you just could, I was a little kid. I remember mom brought home these shortbread cookies with chocolate stripes on them or something. Oh my God. And I'd steal as many of them as I can so my brothers and sisters wouldn't eat them because I wanted them for myself. That's
Mm.
me, you know.
Mary Jo, I mean, I started to not believe I was junk when I saw that. So for me, it was a huge sign of hope. And
Yeah,
but I felt like I was junk for a very long time. And Mary Jo referred to herself as my spiritual advisor rather than some other name is what she preferred. And I said, that's fine, cool, I dig it. But she said one day when I was going to quit MAD because I wanted to commit suicide after speaking, because I felt so filled with grief, I thought I didn't, you know, uh, sober up so I could feel like a piece of garbage. I felt great when I was talking, but afterwards I wanted to commit suicide and run my car into a bridge or a tree or something. She said, Timothy, you are walking with the enemy, and the enemy is you. And the only power others have over you is that you don't feel good enough about yourself. And she
yeah,
gave me a specific exercise, mirror therapy. And you talked about looking in the mirror earlier. And I had to do mirror therapy. I won't say what that's all about, but for 8 years. And she said, just keep doing it every day before you do anything else. Look in the mirror and say, Timothy, I love you, and just do it till you mean it. 8 years later, I finally meant it.
wow,
Sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. It'll always materialize as long as we work for it, right? So I had to
yeah,
keep my eye on the prize. And I have not felt like committing suicide over, um, the things I've done in the past. And I got to see myself with a new pair of eyes, like a child. Does that song sound familiar to you, like a child?
yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah, and give me new eyes. And
mhm,
the whole thing is about trying to change some of that little kid and the concepts that I kind of carved them into my heart, my soul, and my brain that this is the way it is. And I came in, to recovery that way. I got to change some of those things. If I don't do this, then they're not going to think this about me. And the thread now is getting clearer to me how it goes back to the instincts of wanting, to have approval and affection. And, when there's 137 12-step groups, but the very origins of them, somehow that guy got in there a little column in one of those steps where the questions were raised. How does it affect all these manifestations of self? My pride, my self-esteem, my social life, my sex, all that stuff. And then further into the step work, 4 and 6. Six is all about that stuff. And it's just an amazing spiritual path that a lot of people are on these days. Um, and I'm seeing a closer, tighter thread, to this instinct stuff,
mm,
and to change my thinking that I'm not junk and there's going to be enough to go around. And that's the good news.
mhm,
Bad news is I gotta stay on it. I gotta
mhm.
practice it. I gotta every day wash the
Right,
slate
right.
clean. How did I do?
Mhm,
You know, and I heard a friend of mine say one time, and I hope this makes sense, without me getting too much detail, and I won't use a swear word because it'd be nice not to, for once, but Said, my wife calls me on my crap.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so someone like me trying to get better, I've got to learn how to call myself on my crap. I can't have, and I got to share that with somebody. And when I do that, this magical little God's dance starts to happen. The three of us. This is not three, but
Hmm. No,
something
I get it.
happens when I do that. And now your picture of I'm not junk really is clear to me. I realize, guess what? I'm just like you, just like you. So all of us can't be junk.
Amen.
Because that ain't gonna, that doesn't make any sense either to me, you know.
It's kind of funny how um, it's almost like God chooses the weak things of the world to bring out such beauty, and reminding each other of who we really are versus, um, it's like it's like while we're angry, we're never angry for the reason we think we are. And once we bring forgiveness and compassion, it puts the true focus of where we're going in our lives and where we are truly in our lives versus the distractions.
Yeah. And the concept of, well, good, I feel better. I'm good, you know, which isn't, you're not done yet. I'm supposed to take this and try to help someone else. And in doing that, I won't lose it. There's so many things that are paradoxes, you just kind of
Hmm.
scratch your head. But once you do, you start to realize it. That's why Mary Jo went to you, because she knew she needed to share that or she would lose it. And that, the whole idea of that is, I have to try to simplify things, and I'm either going to live a self-centered life or a God-centered life. And we know the God-centered one is just it's a pretty cool, like aiming for that light. I'll never get there and I stumble but I got to decide, every morning which way am I going to go? And my experience is when I choose that self stuff, oh, I'll get all garbled up and I won't be happy. And then the fear starts locking in. And then my instincts are driving me like a nut job. And I've only learned that, like a little child over
Hmm.
experience of what to do and not to do.
I know in some therapeutic circles they talk about self-esteem a lot, and
Oh,
I
yeah.
I understand the idea behind it, but um, I I feel like self-esteem is okay, but God-esteem is really what goes the distance. So I
Right.
choose God-esteem over self-esteem any day,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
because I can too easily make it about me if I'm, you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So
And I'm gonna try something here.
okay,
This could go over like a lead balloon. But can you hear that piano?
no, no, just
Try this. No.
I hear it's trying to pick up sound, but it's just
Oh,
barely
that's too
anything.
bad. Um,
Oh,
let
darn.
me try
Which
this. I
song?
got one more button to. Does this work?
No, it's better than the other one was though, but there's nothing coming
Better?
through. No, still can't hear it.
Okay. Well,
There's no way to bring your mic down that you're using to
I don't
speak
have
on,
it.
or
The cord went haywire, and I kind of it bums me out that happened. But
right, right, that's right. You said that.
the new album, on the better side of me, and is really a blessing for me. Being my age, and the producer Denny Sywell, who he formed Wings with McCartney, and how this all happened is really pretty cool. And we got this album done and got it signed, and it's out, and just a lot of it's kind of unbelievable to me. And this record label that I'm on has these new things called a musical bead, and it's new technology. I can carry 100 of these around easier than CDs, and then all I gotta
Hmm.
do is, you buy one or I give you one. You tap it to your phone and the album's downloaded into the phone immediately. And
Awesome. Well,
this
good.
company, yeah, the company I'm with is trying to help musicians have a little more control over what they do. And so it's a really fun thing. And this will be the first time that I get to use these when I come to Minneapolis.
Oh, that's going
I
to
can
be
envision
exciting.
myself with a bunch of older folks trying to figure out the technology. But the technology aside, the album's an old-fashioned record, where
Mhm.
every song on there is worth listening to, we think. You,
Well, have a millennial nearby to explain to
that's
us
right.
old
Just
farts.
have your grandkids kind of
Hmm.
and so it's going to be a fun thing in a lot of ways. And coming back home, that's my home, and that's where I started my new life and journey there.
I remember visiting you and your pad, and we hung out
Oh
a
wow.
bit, and it's like, wow, he's got all this music stuff around here, and you helped me write that, gave me ideas and structure to the poem that I was working on
Oh wow.
for little Timmy. Been a long, long time. Mary Jo helped me with it too, and you contributed before I finished it. So thank you for that. And yeah. So, is there, you know what? I want to give you the last minute here before we close out. And is there some kind of uplifting, uh, ideal inspiration that you have in your life that just really helps you, um, I don't know, feel like you're doing God's will, really, really like connected to the people that you're loving, to that higher source?
I I won't think about it too hard. Yesterday I worked at Cumberland Heights and I did a lot of groups. I was tired. And I'm going, oh brother. And I had to do a concert at another place called the Recovery Church last night after work. And I'm thinking, oh, where am I going to get the energy and how am I going to do this? And I lugged myself over there. And the minute I walked in the door, I realized some really wonderful stuff's going to happen. And I did the song Like a Child, which I do really a lot. And I asked some people to get up and sing. And they do some work in ministry with prisons. And a fella got up to sing with me right next to me, and I got him to sing a little part. And the look in his eyes, because we collectively told him he was not junk and that we love you. And it's
Mm-hmm.
undeniable what that look is of being
Mm-hmm.
accepted and loved. And he had tears in his eyes, and we're hugging the heck out of him, and we just had a really wonderful time. So I need to remember and trust that just go, show up, do what you're supposed to do. Don't demand so much stuff, and God will take care of the rest of it. So,
Amen to that.
no
That's what
kidding.
I've experienced. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
And thank you for being a guest on my podcast. And I'll put your contact information as relevant to your business in the description and the like. Um, Not your, nothing too personal. Don't worry.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
the link to your website and things like that, so your record label and
And come
s-
on out to the Recovery Church on the 21st and
in St. Paul, Minnesota,
St.
for those of
Paul.
you who are local. Be
Yeah,
there or be square.
they're going to have a little dinner and uh,
Meet and greet
yeah,
or
something. I'm not, however, I'll be there for that, but just come and we'll have fun and we'll sing and laugh and cry a little bit and go
Mhm.
home and hopefully we'll all be okay.
Awesome.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much. All
Yes,
right.
sir. Love you, brother.
Love you too, man. See you in a
Peace
week.
out.
See you in a couple weeks. Ciao.
Okay. Ciao.